again to Cabra Matters. We are recording this week's episode for Tactics, and this week we are talking about defending against Colombo. My name is Rob. I'm joined by Will and Hien. We're pastors of the English congregation at Cabra Matter Anglican Church. It's our privilege to be with you and for you to tune in with us. Just a reminder again, we're going through the book Tactics by Gregory Kukul. Please grab a copy. We encourage you to read through it and digest it with us. And the point of this podcast really is just to engage with what he's saying. And we hope that it will be fruitful for you, as it has been for us, especially as we seek to share the good news of Jesus with our friends, our family, or our neighbors who don't know Jesus. Now this week, it's called Defending Against Colombo. So in other words, what do you do if someone Colombos you in return? There are people out there who use similar tactics on us by asking questions, asking leading questions. What do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? What if someone just kind of pushes back against you with questions of their own? And then what if you get caught off guard? So for example, once upon a time, I was doing walk-up evangelism at a local high school, and this was for college mission. And I walked up to a group of people to ask them the question, hey, have you heard about Jesus before? And this person, rather than answering that question, she just fired back at me, hey, you're a Christian. Do babies go to hell? And I just thought, whoa, okay. And so picture this, I was in a group setting. There was this person who was just very kind of almost confrontational. And then all her friends were listening in. I'm now in this situation. I have to answer the question in some way or another. Otherwise, I might just be avoiding the issue. What I did, I was caught off guard. What I did was I did give an answer, and I tried to show it. Well, I didn't have my Bible with me. Bad move. But anyway, I gave my answer, and then, for better or for worse, the bell went, and then the conversation kind of ended there. But she did have some follow-up questions as well. Either way, it was just, I remember being really dissatisfied with my answer. And I remember feeling very inadequate and incompetent when I gave my answer. And so what do you do in that kind of situation? When someone asks you such a loaded question, do babies go to hell? What do you do at that point? And so I'm gonna hand it over to Will, who's gonna give us a bit of a recap and a bit of a summary of some of the principles that come through from this chapter. And then later we'll revisit this example and apply them.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Thanks for that story. I'm pretty sure many of us have similar stories as well, of being put on the spot with a tricky question that if we answered straight out would put us in a very bad position. Like we might look like intolerant or look pretty bad, or saying that we agree with something that most people don't agree with. So I think it'll be good to be able to work through it later if we have the time to. I'm pretty sure we do. That's the whole point. So let's do it. So this chapter, I think it's like the Bible passage that comes to mind when thinking about this chapter is Matthew chapter 10, verse 16. So this is when Jesus says to his disciples, I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. So this is about, I think this chapter is about being wise when we're interacting with people out there. Not saying that everyone's a wolf, right? But there are wolves out there who are out to score points against Christians and try to make us look bad or kind of shake our faith, which is normal. So he's trying to. The principle here is kind of like, how do we be wise in the way that we talk to people, and how do we continue to be gracious and gentle and innocent as well? And so it's just kind of like setting that context out for us. So one of the main principles of this chapter is that we should be happy to clarify our views. We should be happy to answer questions if people ask us questions and explain how we believe, what we believe. That's pretty much what we looked at last week, like the First Peter passage, where we've got to be ready to give an answer, give reason to what we believe in, the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. So So these are opportunities to clarify and to explain why we believe things. But I think what we need to be aware of is if the other side is trying to be tricky or trying to trap us with their line of questioning. And I think we also mentioned it a bit last week that Colombo, like from our perspective, we want to be, you know, gracious and positive in the way that we use it. We want to be curious and finding out more about the other person and what they think with Colombo. But we also know that Colombo can be misused to lead people into a trap in their reasoning, or confusing people, or used to confuse people in their reasoning as well. That's not what we're on about. But the thing is, Colombo can be used to manipulate and to confuse and to draw people into a trap. So I think this chapter is just kind of watching out for that. Another principle to keep in mind that I found helpful is a quote from page 127. He says that you are in complete control of your side of the conversation. You have no obligation to cooperate with anyone trying to set you up with leading questions. And I find that especially helpful because, you know, you don't have to answer every question that they ask you in the way that they've asked you. You could clarify their questions. You could refuse to answer a particular question because you know that you don't know where that's going to take you, and you can be upfront with that. You could say stuff like, and he gives good examples of what to say in those situations. You can say stuff like, you know, I'm not too sure where you're going with this question. Can you please clarify what you mean or what point you're trying to make? And then in that maneuver means that you don't have to make a bad point against yourself. You don't force yourself to kick an own goal, right? You get them to make the point themselves, and that's actually better because once they've stated a point, right, then you can ask them to back it up. Oh, what's your reasoning behind that? Why did you make that point? How did you come to that conclusion? You can ask them those questions, and then you become the question asker, and then you're in the driver's seat. So that's a good maneuver, because if you think that they're trying to manipulate you and force you into a corner, you can kind of like ask them to state their point, and once they've stated their point, they have to back it up, and then you can ask questions from there.
So if I could just butt in there just briefly, it was really hard because it was the first thing that she asked. I couldn't quite tell if it was like a genuine question or whether she was trying to put me into a corner or whether she was just like curious, actually. It just came across as a bit hostile, but then maybe it was actually just curious. So yeah.
Because I think we got to think about one question that came to mind was, is the person who asked you the question actually interested in the theological response, right, that you're giving, or are they after something else? Like, is she trying to put you in the corner to make you sound like a bigot who says babies do go to hell?
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing that was tricky because it was in a crowd setting, and so like that kind of question, I wonder whether it was intended to like discredit me or discredit Christians, and then just kind of make us look bad in front of her friends. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So what's one way that we could go around that then?
Well, I was going to ask you because you had your spiel. It sounded like one thing that I heard was like you don't exactly have to answer the question straight up. It's just kind of like, well, I'm still in control of my side. I can ask her in return, oh, like that's actually a very personal and confrontational question. Is there a point behind it that you'd like to make? And then would you like to make that first? Give me some time to think about my views before we have a discussion about it. Like potentially I could do it that way.
Yep.
But then I don't know what to do if she, just straight up just says, "Oh, just answer the question." It's like, yeah.
And I think also you got to be clear on your views as well. Like, would have done a little bit of thought yourself on your views. And so for a question like that, even if you present your view and they pick at it, at least that you can correct them if they start to make your view sound not what your view is. And so if you know your view, you can correct them.
So how do we get to the point of correcting the view here?
I think because you make an answer, right? Say for example, do babies go to hell, like Rob says, and you have a position, okay, they don't go to hell, for example, and you know your reasons and all the reasons for that, and then they'll say, well, are you saying that all I know whatever, right? And then you can, if you're clear on your own view, then you can say, no, that's not what I meant, this is what I meant. And then if they keep going to trying to make it look bad, you say, well, I think you're making things up, this is my view, and restate that view. Because you can get into an argument and then you drift away from your view, and then the argument becomes something different.
Happens all the time.
And so if you restate what you're actually talking about and actually know, and then you can stick to the question that was asked instead of just moving to other questions.
Yeah, which reminds me, actually, in a previous chapter, there was a tactic that Gregory recommended, which was to narrate the argument. Actually say, oh, this is what's happened, this is where we started, this is where we've now drifted to. Is it okay if we bring it back to the original question, for example? So that's just kind of like a way to intervene and just to bring it back. Yeah, I mean, so from here, I guess it sounds like one thing we could try is try to get her to state her point, rather than just walk into it and give my point of view, and then I set myself up for trouble. Yeah.
And I know that this was quite a while ago, so like I take it that you went in and you were asking, like you started off with talking about Jesus, and then very early on in the discussion, the girl asks you, do you think babies go to hell? Maybe you could go, oh, I didn't talk about babies.
Yeah, true.
Maybe like that's a big question. Maybe we could talk about it, deal with it another time later, if we have time. But I asked you guys this question, like, have you thought about Jesus before, and what do you think about him? Because I think that's the important thing that I want to talk about. Because I think there's a pressure, right? Like when we go in to talk to people, we feel like we have to answer everyone's question. And that's how I feel as well. Like I just remembered what's it called, like this Sunday when we had question time, right? And then someone asked a question and I was like, oh, I should take that on notice because I haven't really reflected on this. And then after saying that, like a thought came to my mind, and I'll answer the question, but then it wasn't a reflected answer. It was just kind of like, oh, I haven't really thought about this, but I have a go anyway. And I even already said that I would take it on notice and come back at it another time. You know what I mean? There's this pressure to be able to answer, like respond to questions straight away, that we need to. I think what I'm learning from this chapter is I could learn to, resist that pressure and go, it's okay if I don't answer some of these questions. I don't have to answer every question, and I can come back to it another time or whatever. Yeah, so I think that's one possible way out, right? She asked you that question, you can go, oh, no, that's a really big question. I don't think that's I haven't brought anything up about babies. I asked you guys about Jesus. Let's talk about that first. Yeah.
And I think it takes practice not to be always answering the question, because sometimes you only know half of, like, only have half an opinion, like you haven't really fully centered down what the opinion is, and then you go and try and answer it. That's when you get wrecked, and they pick you apart.
After thinking about it a bit more, this is progressive revelation. You could even like shape it to say, oh, that's a very big question. Like, can you tell me how babies going to hell relates to my question about Jesus?
Yeah.
Right. So then you bring it back to what you're trying to say. You're talking about Jesus. You're asking them about Jesus. She thinks about babies going to hell. You're like, oh, I don't know how they relate. Can you explain to me how you got there and how that relates to the question about Jesus? And then and then that would state her point.
Mm.
You know, and
Or,
then, and
or
then
you can,
go,
yeah. No,
Sorry,
sorry.
go.
Okay. No, I was gonna
and then-
say, or
Ian, go.
I was gonna say, you can also ask her, has she had any experience of a baby dying, or someone in her close contacts circle has a baby dying. That's why she's asking the question. So, it's showing care as well, and seeing where she's at with that question.
And that's actually a really good one because, oh, sorry, Will. Anyway, that's actually a really good one because I remember going on walk up once, and we were going around asking people, door knocking, asking people if you could ask God any question, what would it be? And then this person just straight up asked, why did God kill my baby brother? And then just closed the door. And I just thought, whoa. Like, I think that was it just escalated very quickly, and then just had no kind of opportunity to respond. Maybe this person does have an experience behind that question, but they might have baggage, and I guess my instinct would be to try to unpack that and get her to open up, rather than just directly answer the question from scripture.
Because I think like we want to have generous assumptions on the person asking questions, but like I also want to take into account that it is a public space, right? So like there are other people listening in, and so like I wonder whether like you got to take into account the wider audience as well in the interaction. Because I guess I think what like if we're thinking that she doesn't have genuine curiosity to that question, I think she's just trying to paint you in a negative light in terms of the rest of the audience. But I like the question of, how does this relate to Jesus? Because I asked about Jesus and you talked about babies. I don't see how, like, I can't think of the connection there. Can you please enlighten me about that connection? And then she will state a point, right? Like Jesus teaches this and therefore that, and then we can go to the correction part, or you can clarify further and clarify more, and then until you get a distilled point from her. And then I think that also takes into account the audience, right? Because then her views would come out, and if there's if there's problems with her view, you can deal with it, and then the rest of the audience can learn from that.
So it sounds like when in doubt, ask a clarifying question. When in doubt, try to get the other person to talk and open up, because they probably have a story or a reason for their line of questioning. If it is with ill motives, then I guess got to be, you can either deflect it, you can either ask a question in return, or you could close the whole conversation. In this example, that may not be the wisest one because you just started it. So probably lean more towards deflecting or reframing the question to turn the tables back on the other person. Have you guys come across, just moving on slightly here, people who've ever posed hypotheticals to you? I'd be curious to hear. Has anyone ever asked you? So for example, Gregory goes into this. He's like, well, if the universe always existed, then it wasn't created. If it wasn't caused, what would that mean? Like, emphasis there is just on the if. Like, whenever you hear an if question, that's a hypothetical. And sometimes people ask these questions to put Christians into traps. I can't remember from the top of my head whether I've had one asked of me. What about you guys?
I have asked, but it's not specific because I can't remember the specifics of it. But I do remember that I always try and answer it, and then I'll get hammered.
Yeah.
So after that, I've learned that trying to, because we used to call it popping balloons. Like these questions are like balloons, and they'll just keep asking these hypotheticals, and I'm just trying to pop them, but it doesn't get to the core, and so I've trained myself to look out for these balloons.
Yeah.
And then when they do get asked, I said I ignore. I ignore them, but I try to change back to the core subject.
But the skill is how do you do that? Like how do you ignore or like bring it back to the topic at hand?
Yeah. Because it
I
sounds
think it's
like
practice.
it sounds like if we were to follow Greg's line of reasoning, it's you could be the Colombo who's like, oh, I'm kind of bumbling around, I'm a bit confused, I'm not sure why you're asking that question. Could you help me just understand where you're coming from? Like that could be one way. It's a kind of a more gentle, what do you call it? Kind of like a dove-like approach. And the more direct approach is like, hey, I didn't ask that question. Why are you asking me this question? Can we talk about what we actually talked about before? Like that's kind of more direct, confrontational. It seems like it's almost like an art. Like you got to just know which one in the moment, like to use depending on the person and the situation.
Yeah, and that gets practice. Like it takes practice to do that. And if you're not actively thinking about doing that, then you get trapped.
Yeah.
So you just got to practice. So in the past week since I've been reading this chapter, I've been listening to Jordan Peterson in his interviews with certain reporters and journalists who are against his views.
Are you saying that?
And like I can see that he's using this tactic. Like the reporters or the interviewer would say that, so you think this, like just something that's not what you think, and then he actually says them, well, that's not the answer, the question, like, or that's not the answer, or that's not what I think. This is what I think, or can you rephrase your question, or I don't understand what you're trying to ask. So he's using like all these techniques that in this chapter has been suggested to use. And then I think, I can learn a few things. So I've been watching more of these videos, so I can learn more of what he does. So yeah, just hearing people do it in action is pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, so we've had, for example, if someone asks you a leading question, what do you do? We've had hypotheticals, like, if this, then that. What about, say, if someone challenges you just up front, who are you to say, that babies, this is where babies go? What are some wisdom? What's some wisdom that we can gain from tactics here? Over to you, Will.
Yeah, I think like there's a whole bunch of questions that kind of like are in that sphere. Like, who are you to say this, or like what gives you the right to say that, or that's just your interpretation. I get that one a lot. That's just your interpretation. I have my interpretation. Blah blah blah. That's okay. Especially with the ones where they talk about don't all roads lead to the same God or something. So who are you to say that there's only one way? And I think like the way that Gregory kind of deals with that, because it's a very specific question though. So I'm wondering whether there's like a wider application to that. So his specific one is like, who are you to have like, he's kind of trying to say that you're arrogant in claiming that you have the truth and everyone else is wrong, right? And then Greg's kind of principle response is like, well, ultimately the person with the best reasons is in the best position to say what's true or false. And then the person who argues that, like, you're wrong for disagreeing with other people, you're wrong for saying that you hold the truth, is claiming to have a better grasp of the truth than you do. So their side falls down, right? So that's a very specific instance. If someone claims that you don't have a right to the truth, they are making a truth claim themselves, that they have the ultimate truth, and so they logically their point doesn't make sense. It falls down. But I'm wondering whether there's a wider application that I haven't really thought about, but it seemed like a very specific situation there that he was talking about. Do you guys have any other wisdom?
For me,
I
I
think
think
from
oh, you go.
yeah.
You go here.
I was just saying, like, from Gregory's point of view, I think he says when someone does that, they just wants to quit the conversation or stop that conversation going further and just makes these statements. And so they don't want to really talk more about it. And I think for us, we can either stop there or pursue a different angle of question. Of questioning.
Yeah, just I think if someone does that, they're trying to close the loop, or it's kind of like their trump card. Yeah, like, and that kind of situation, they probably have strong opinions behind it, or assumptions. And so I guess he would recommend us to unpack that, and just to ask that question. Going back to Colombo 101, what do you mean by that? And I really liked it when he actually gave so if you look at page 136 to 139, he kind of uses a combination of all these questions in that exchange. It was an exchange between him and a waiter, and just various times, like she either has assumptions or like she just makes statements which try to kind of close the conversation. And I was just really impressed by the way that he just gently challenges those assumptions. Like he doesn't actually let the conversation close. Like he just kind of asks her in return, why would you believe that, in response to an assertion that she makes? Do you think I'm wrong then? I'm just like, oh, like those are kind of quite direct questions that I wouldn't have thought naturally to ask, but he does. Yeah, so it was really, really cool. Some examples here, for example, what was it? When she ignores his question, she then makes an assertion. Well, no one can ever know the truth about religion. And so at that point, I would have just been stumped. I'm like, oh, what do I do then? But then he just goes, well, let's just gently challenge that and ask, why would you believe that? And so then again, that kind of catches her by surprise and gets her to keep on talking. So it just sounds like if someone is trying to close the loop by pulling out a trump card or making a big assertion, keep asking questions to clarify, keep asking questions to get them to unpack, I guess in a sense, question their own framework behind what they're saying.
Yeah, I think what I found helpful about that was the principle that he brought out. He was like, well, most people haven't seriously thought about their opinion. And so, or most people haven't been challenged by their opinion. So like with that example with the waiter, she says something and then most people will just be like, oh, okay, that's it, right? But then he challenges it and then she's stumped because she hasn't really been challenged by, her opinion hasn't been challenged, or she hasn't really thought through her reasoning as to why she has that opinion. So when you bring it out, it kind of makes them realize, oh, hang on a moment, why do I actually hold this opinion? Is it actually reasonable to hold that opinion? And I think that's the whole stone in the shoe moment, right?
Yeah, and like the assertions are pretty like common ones somewhat. It's like all religions are basically the same after all. No one can ever know the truth about religion. The Bible has been changed and translated so many times you can't trust it. Like they're kind of common, and I was just really impressed by just him constantly asking her and kind of not letting her off the hook and getting her to explore her own opinions and answer them. But I guess at the end of the day, if there's one thing to remember from this, it's just ask questions. Like keep asking questions, because we can't overcomplicate this by thinking, oh, is this a hypothetical? Is this a challenge? Is this a leading question? I think in the moment, it's just let that go and just ask questions in return. Get them to keep unpacking like their own framework. Because when you do that, then you're still in charge of the conversation. You can either get them to clarify, you can correct them, you can get them to talk, I guess. Yeah.
Cool. I think from this point on in the book, he's going to talk about specific ways of thinking that people have, or specific opinions, and how to deal with it. So this is the building up your knowledge side of things. So that'll be pretty juicy.
Yep.
And I guess we'll be talking that through as well. Yeah, so that's kind of like the end of Colombo.
Yeah. So if we could just bring it all back to that original story or setting, you know, do babies go to hell? If we were to apply just a summary of all the principles here, here's a bit of a recap. One thing could just be to recognize that it may not be an innocent question. It could be one that's like trying to discredit you. At that point, you could either close it, or you could turn the tables back on her and ask the question, how does this relate to the question that I asked about Jesus? Would you better explore that with me? Or you could say something like, I'm a bit confused about why you're asking that question, or that sounds like a really personal thing. Would you be happy to share with me why you're asking that question before I give you my opinion? Like just something like that, just to kind of deflect it a little and turn the tables back on her. So that's one thing. Second thing is just unpacking the person, which is a bit similar to the first actually. It's just what makes you ask that question. Like, help me understand. Is there some kind of grief in the past that I'm not aware of? I want to know before I walk into say anything that might be quite upsetting for you. The last one is it could just be you refuse to answer it, which is my sense is you have a point to make with your question. What confuses me? It confuses me because I'm not sure how I should respond. Could you just say your point directly and then give me some time to think about my view? Would that be okay with you? So a couple of ways to maneuver it if you get put into a corner, to kind of either turn it around or to get yourself out of it.
Yep.
Anything to add?
So I think it's just like the principle of if people are trying to lead you somewhere with their questions, try to get them to state their point so that you can then ask them questions. Right, that seems to be the tactic here.
So if we can't remember anything from this, it's just the one thing: ask questions. Keep asking questions. That will get you out of a tight spot. All right. Well, we hope that was helpful for you as we continue to endeavor. Not endeavor. We continue to work hard at making disciples. We continue to share the good news with those around us. Keep persevering. Jesus doesn't say that it will be easy work, but it is the work that He has given us to do until He returns. And as we do that, I'm sure we'll meet hostilities. We'll meet people who try to Colombo us in return. And so this is where this chapter is useful, and we hope that it will be useful and fruitful for you in the years to come. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you'll be able to tune in with us next time.